as I said, this segment I want to get to NBA players and the vaccine. And I may be asking for trouble because I don't know if there's a more controversial topic. But I don't really know that it should be controversial, but I'm sure it will be somehow, and I'm sure that I'm going to get hate for it one way or the other, but I don't care. So before we dive deep into this segment, as I said before, I'm not anti-vax. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing, and I believe everyone should have the right to their own privacy, especially when it comes to personal health choices. Because I don't know everybody's health background and family history. So some things are going to affect people differently. Some things are going to have a bigger impact or effect on people than others. So I never really think it's a smart idea to make a broad generalization about anything. As we heard that broad generalizations are not good, because you're basically just you're not looking in, you're not really taking the individual and looking at them from an individual standpoint. You're putting them into a general group, which isn't good for obvious reasons. And the smarter people will know that. But the smarter people will have a better understanding as to why. But especially personal health choices, I don't think you can really ever, with so many different diseases and health issues that we have in the world, I don't think that putting a broad generalization on personal health choices is the brightest of ideas. Sure, I got the vaccine, but I'm never, and I mean never, will I shove the vaccine down someone's throat and say, you need to get it, or else I'm not talking to you anymore. That's just not how I roll. I'm not going to, if one of my friends says, hey, I'm not a big fan of this vaccine. I see how it's, affecting some people, and I don't know just yet. I'm not sure. Like, I'm going to say, okay, I respect your opinion. I'm not going to say, oh my God, what is wrong with you? I'm never talking to you again. Get out. I'm never, I'm shunning you. No, that's not how you treat people. Whether they agree with you or not, you don't treat people like that. And we've seen this in the NBA, right? It's one thing to see it on a local level or a general level, but it's another thing to see it on a big stage like the NBA. And recently, big names players, not just some small player's name that you never heard of before, but it's these big names. 3 of them. There's at least 3. I can tell you that. There's probably more that are not getting media attention. But it's the big names that are getting the big media attention, as always. Bradley Beal, Andrew Wiggins, and Kyrie Irving have come out in the past few weeks saying that they have not gotten the vaccine. And by the way it sounds, they don't really intend on it. They don't plan on it. And as you might expect, the big wigs, ESPN, the suits at ESPN, Stephen A. Smith, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Now, he's not an ESPN guy. He's, I think, some player association, head of some, player group, have come out in extreme disgust against these players, which was interesting and a little bit ironic for me to see. Stephen A. Smith came out saying that the Nets should trade Kyrie because he won't get the vaccine. And he said, Andrew Wiggins, I know he said he had something, to say about Andrew Wiggins, as well. And Kareem had come out and said something, for whatever reason, I didn't write down the exact quote. And I want to take, before we get into this further, I want to flash back to the summer of 2020. And we all remember the summer of 2020, what was, especially the NBA had a big part in this. And, NBA had a big part in leading the charge for for racial equality and social justice. And we all heard about how important the players' voice and opinion mattered regarding that issue. We constantly heard that from, not only from the players themselves, but from Stephen A. Smith. He said his fair share about this last year, as well as so many other people did, and rightfully so. We heard a lot about this, about how the players have feelings, their opinion matters, and their voice needs to be heard, which is fine. That's completely, that is fine. I have nothing wrong with that. I'm just, again, people oftentimes, like I said earlier, people misunderstand me when I say this. People are like, oh my God, you're against it. No, I'm just telling you that that's what happened. And that's what happened. I'm not going to tell you that I'm against it. I'm just telling you, hey, these big figures, players included, said, hey, our voice and opinion needs to be heard, and we need to have our voices heard about these important issues in our society. And their voices were heard. They were, they canceled a whole, day or a weekend of games almost to get a better understanding as to where these players are coming from. So the NBA really worked hard to understand, to get a better understanding of what was going on and how these issues are affecting the NBA players, which is great. Now, moving back to today, the same players who said our voice needs to be heard and were applauded for that and were, in some ways given the microphones to tell the story and tell give their perspective on these issues, are now getting absolutely blasted over personal health choices, which makes me wonder, did their voice actually matter to those who proclaimed it did last year? Now that their views and choices don't align with those at ESPN and the big suits in the NBA, they are getting a whole different treatment than they did last year. Again, last year, it was all about how their voice needs to be heard and their opinions and their views need to be well considered, which is great, and that's perfectly, that's awesome. I applaud the NBA for taking that so seriously and really, taking a halt on playing basketball and, trying to take care of their people. And I understand that getting a vaccine that will protect you against a virus is protecting your people and again, protecting your people, making sure those are safe. However, personal health choices are something that I don't think, you have to be careful really to put a broad generalization on, as you do with anything else. So, but it's just interesting to me that the same players who were given the microphone to tell their story and give their point of view on something are now getting absolutely blasted for not putting a needle in their arm. And, it is very, very interesting to me. And I don't know, it really came out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting that to happen, but it was just, again, really interesting to see that players who were applauded, applauded to hear their voice, are now getting blasted for not playing ball with views of Stephen A. Smith and other big figures on ESPN and in the NBA. So it just makes me wonder, did their voice really matter at all in the summer of 2020, or did their voice just matter, quotation marks, did their voice matter because what they wanted to and had to say aligned with the views of those who were saying that their voice needs to be heard? It makes me wonder, did their voice really matter at all, or was it just were they just being used to further show their views and their opinions on a matter, on a social matter in the world? And there's news coming out that unvaxxed players are not going to be able to play in games in certain cities in the country, San Francisco and New York City being a few examples. In San Francisco, that affects the Warriors, and New York, I think it would affect both the Knicks and the Nets. It's not just New York City. I think it's New York as a whole. And it's interesting to see that this has come out in only the NBA. I'm not, I haven't heard this be an issue with MLB, and NHL is just starting, so I'm not really sure how that will shake out. But the NFL, right? We're going into week 4 of the NFL regular season, and yet nobody has been told you can't play a game because you didn't get the vaccine. And I know for a fact that not every team has a 100% vaccine rate, because going into the season, that was a big deal. Whereas some players like Lamar Jackson, Carson Wentz, and there was a player on Washington. I don't know if it was Chase Young, but one of the players on Washington said he wasn't, planning on getting the vaccine anytime soon, and he was really pressured on it. And so I know for a fact that the NFL is not 100% vaccinated. And I understand that NFL is an outdoor environment. Most of them are, right? But there are dome stadiums, right? Dallas, Arizona, LA, Minnesota, Detroit. Let's see, where else does they have a dome stadium? But you get the point. And so Vegas, yes, Vegas. But you get the point. So it's interesting how the NFL has not told their players that if you go to a domed stadium in Vegas or LA, that you can't play unless you get the vaccine. It's really interesting that we haven't seen that in the NFL at all. We haven't heard any rumblings of that even we haven't even heard that as a possibility of happening. And yet before the NBA season even starts, we're hearing that Kyrie Irving's not going to be able to play half the season because he hasn't gotten the vaccine. So I wonder why this is such a big issue with the NBA and not the NFL, because you look at an NBA roster and it's less than half the size of an NFL roster. I mean, think about how many players and how many people, not just players, but people on the coaching staff and the players, how many people it takes to make up an NFL team. Not just players, but the staff as well. Doctors. I mean, it's crazy how many people it takes. And yet we haven't heard anything about, hey, guess what? Sorry, but if you have a dome stadium and you're in an area where COVID is a big issue, you have to be vaccinated in order to play football. And there's like 200 people. That's probably a little bit. I would say about 150 to 200 people is how much it takes to make up an NFL roster for game day. How many people it takes to go out on the field and play football. NBA, I mean, there's what? Maybe 15, 20 guys, 15 players, right? And maybe another 5 coaches. So it takes, and then the other people it takes to run an NBA team for game day, right? Big high estimate. I'm going over 50 people, right? That's at least 100 less people that it takes to staff an NBA team than it does to do an NFL team, and yet it's a big issue whether you have a vaccine for NBA or not. And it's just really odd how this is, and think about the cities where there's an NFL and NBA team. It's very similar cities, right? A lot of cities have more than one team. And so it's really interesting how the NBA has made it a big issue and not, the NFL is just kind of, they go on with their lives almost. And it's really odd that, and I know I said, hey, it takes a lot of people to staff an NFL team. Think about college football. I mean, there's almost 100 people, or there's almost 150 people in players alone. So there's probably 200 to 250 people to take a team out on game day and play football. And we haven't heard anything about how these kids or coaches need to be 100% vaccinated or they can't play. And they're also saying that unvaccinated players in the NBA are going to get tested not weekly, not monthly, but daily. And let's take another flashback to 2020, where we heard the quote, tests should be for the sick, not the wealthy. And now there's a shortage of rapid tests. You go out to get a rapid test at the pharmacy or at Walmart, you can't find them anywhere. And and my dad felt a little sick. He got a test a few weeks ago. He couldn't find a rapid test anywhere. He also had to wait 5 days to get an appointment. Getting an appointment is more difficult than getting a ticket to the Super Bowl, for crying out loud. So he had to wait 5 days, 3 or 5 days to get an appointment for a test. And then it wasn't until another week later that he got his results back. And by the time he got the results back, he felt fine. So, but thank goodness he was negative. But what if he was positive? He went for a whole almost 2 weeks without knowing. And you're gonna take all these tests up and you're gonna use them on multi-millionaire players? Give me a break. Tests should be for the sick, not the wealthy. My goodness. You kidding me? If it's really a big issue, make the players, since it's their decision, and honor their decision and say, okay, we respect your decision, but you're going to have to, and maybe not daily, but you're going to have to go out and you're going to have to get a test every week. If that's what the NBA wants to do and they want to keep their players being tested, which is fine, I can understand that, make it their responsibility. Don't, we are, and I understand that this is a whole year later, but getting testing is we are in no better place for testing than we were 18 months ago, which is really sad, but it's the truth. And as I said, appointments are few and far between. Rapid tests are it's like finding Santa Claus. It's ridiculous. And yet we heard tests should be for the sick, not the wealthy. And I haven't heard that in 15 months. So maybe they realized how stupid that sounded. And we heard that phrase repeated so many times, and it makes me wonder, it makes me think that was really just a buzz phrase to get you thinking, get you saying, yeah, let's, test should be for the sick, not the wealthy. Now we're going to go test these NBA players who make more money than they know what to do with every day because they, won't get the vaccine, which is fine. You don't want to get the vaccine, that's your choice, that's fine. But if the NBA wants to make sure that their players are healthy, which is perfectly fine as well, I understand that. You want to make sure you guys are healthy. You have to do so, in a I don't want to say ethical, but it's close. That's, I don't know. It's really odd how this whole thing is shaped out, and I don't know. It's really interesting how this whole thing has kind of exploded in the past week.